9 at night, Thursday. You open the calculator app on your phone, not to work out a bill, just a sudden curiosity that hits while you're scrolling. You type in a number, the amount you've always told yourself you'd start saving next month. Then you stop, try to remember how many times you've said that this year. You multiply the number by that count. The screen shows a result, not big enough to be shocking, but big enough that you have to look at it a second time. You don't close the calculator right away. You sit there, looking at the number, and realize this isn't a math problem. It's a receipt for a decision you quietly made a long time ago, just one you never wrote down in digits before. You lock your phone, set it face down on the table. The room goes quiet, only the ceiling fan turning steadily. You don't feel scared. You feel something stranger, like seeing the back of something you'd only ever looked at from the front for years. You reach for the glass of water on the table, take a sip, then sit still for a moment longer, looking out the window where the streetlight spills in. Nothing in the room has changed. The furniture is exactly where it always is. The traffic outside hums along the same as every other night. But there's a very small feeling, hard to name, like you've just opened a drawer you'd been deliberately avoiding for a long time, and now you can't pretend you never saw what was inside. 6 months before that Thursday night, you were having lunch with a former coworker who mentioned she'd set up an automatic transfer, $50 a week, going straight into savings the moment her paycheck landed, before she ever saw that money sitting in her main account. You asked if she felt the difference. She shrugged, said at first she did. Now she doesn't notice at all, because that money is treated as if it was never there. You nodded, said you were planning to do the same, and somewhere in your head thought, next month, this month there's still a few things to sort out. The month after that, and the one after that, you set up nothing, but you did do something else, more consistently than you realized, occasionally opening a tracking app for a crypto coin you'd bought on a whim a year earlier, just a few $100s, checking whether the price had gone up yet. Not because you were confident it would, just because some part of you liked the feeling of hoping that maybe one day it would spike, and you wouldn't have to save little by little every week anymore. You'd just need one lucky break. 3 months later, at the company's year-end team meeting, a coworker who'd been there for almost 20 years announced early retirement. Everyone applauded, congratulated her. After the meeting, standing next to each other by the coffee machine by chance, she said to you, quietly, not to brag, "I'm not smarter than anyone else. I just never missed a single week in 20 years. It was a short line, and you forgot it by the end of that same day, buried under 100 other things to think about. But it stayed somewhere, like a grain of sand in your shoe, not painful right away, just gradually more uncomfortable with every step." A few weeks after that meeting, your birthday came around. An aunt sent you a card with $200 in cash, telling you to buy something nice for yourself. You meant to save it, genuinely meant to, for about 3 seconds, before remembering the pair of headphones you'd had your eye on for a while. You bought them that same afternoon. There's nothing wrong with treating yourself, and the headphones really were good. But that meant to save it for 3 seconds moment, you'd realize later, repeated itself almost identically every time unexpected money landed in your hands. A tax refund, a year-end bonus, a gift. They all followed the same route, in and then out, never once turning down a different path. Early the following month, you got a notice from your landlord that rent would go up by a small amount starting next lease term. You sat down, ran the budget in your head, saw the monthly gap getting a little tighter, and thought, well, that makes it even harder to start saving right now. Let's get stable first and figure it out later. You didn't notice, in that moment, that this was exactly the kind of reasoning you'd been using, under different names, for years. One evening scrolling social media, you saw an old classmate post a screenshot of her banking app, celebrating hitting her savings goal for a down payment on a small house, after 3 years of consistently setting aside a fixed amount every month. The post wasn't showy, just a line thanking her past self for being patient. You hit like, typed a congratulatory comment, then locked your phone. You weren't jealous, or at least you told yourself that, but something quiet settled in, like watching someone walk down a road you'd also once meant to take, except they'd started walking it 3 years ago. That weekend, a close friend invited you out to celebrate a 15% raise after he'd proactively asked his boss to review his salary. Dinner was fun, everyone toasted, ordered another bottle of wine. On the way home, your friend asked, almost in passing, what you'd done with your own raise from last year. You paused for a second, tried to remember, then realized you couldn't. It had blended into monthly spending so fast it left no trace to recall. A few times a month, usually 2 days before payday, you'd open the banking app and see the balance nearly hit zero, a sight so familiar by now it no longer worried you. Just a slight frown before closing the app, telling yourself it'll fill back up in a few days. That cycle repeated as regularly as a tide, nearly empty, then full again, nearly empty, then full again, and never once was any part of that cycle set aside where the tide couldn't reach it. Another evening, you're having dinner with your family, and your dad, watching the news about inflation, mutters that on average, a lot of people at retirement age in the US only have a few tens of thousands of dollars saved, a number he thinks is far too little for what a real retirement actually needs. He's not aiming the comment at you, he's just reacting to the news. But you sit quietly and wonder, if someone averaged out your own saving habits over the last 3 years, which group that number would land closer to? The strange thing is, through all 6 of those months, nothing truly bad happened to you. No job loss, no illness, no debt calling. Life went on as usual, even fairly pleasant. And maybe precisely because everything was fine, you never felt enough reason to stop and actually do the thing you kept saying you'd do. That feeling of still fine turns out to be the thing that makes people delay the longest, longer than a real crisis would, because a crisis forces you to act, while stability asks nothing of you at all. Then came that Thursday night, when you opened the calculator out of pure curiosity, and for the first time saw the number of your own procrastination written out in real digits, no longer just a vague feeling. You opened the calculator again, more seriously this time, not just to calculate what you'd missed, but to try something else. If that money, even just $50 a week, had been sitting in a savings account at the common current rate, around 4% a year, and you left it alone for years to come, it wouldn't just be the sum of the principal. It would grow a little more each year, on its own, without you doing anything further. You don't calculate it precisely, just estimate, but even the estimate is enough to make you set the phone down for a moment. You try another calculation, more out of curiosity than seriousness this time. If you'd started the night you had lunch with your former coworker 6 months ago, instead of tonight, how big would the gap between those two numbers be? Not huge, not a massive amount, just the difference of 6 months of waiting. But you realize, if these 6 months are followed by another 6, and then another, the way they've followed one after another for years already, that gap stops being small. It becomes the shape of an entire way of living, not a single instance of delay. There's something you have to admit, sitting alone in front of that screen. These numbers are only rough estimates, not accounting for taxes, fees, the unexpected months of spending no one can predict, or the possibility that markets and rates shift over time. None of these numbers is a promise. But even discounting for all of that uncertainty, the core of it still holds. There's an amount of money that should have been there, and now isn't. This isn't a calculation of how much poorer you've become. It's a calculation of how many times you've postponed the right to grow naturally. A right that money, if placed in the right spot, is always available to anyone. No need to be smarter than anyone else. No need to be luckier than anyone else. Just don't miss a single week. You think of the coworker by the coffee machine. Not smarter than anyone, just never missed a single week in 20 years. That line, replaying in your head now, no longer sounds like small talk. It sounds like an answer to the exact number sitting on your phone screen. You tear a small piece of paper from the notebook on your desk, write down the exact number you just calculated, no rounding, no decoration. Then you tape it to the inside of your wallet, where you'll see it every time you pull out a card to pay for something. A very small act, barely worth mentioning, but it's the first time in many months that number hasn't just stayed sitting inside a calculator app. It's stepped outside, into your real life, where you can't scroll past it as easily as you scroll past a screen. You pick the wallet back up, open it, look at the note one more time before folding it away neatly. Nothing in the room has changed. The ceiling fan still turns steadily, same as when you first sat down. But you know that next time you open that wallet to pay for something you don't really need, the note will be there, not judging, not scolding, just quietly reminding you that there's another number waiting, somewhere else, if you choose to let it keep waiting. You don't open the banking app to set up an automatic transfer that same night. You don't cancel the crypto tracker you still occasionally check either. No grand transformation happens in a single evening. But something very small has shifted, subtle enough that it takes you a moment to notice. You no longer say, "next month," in your head, not even in passing the way you always used to. You simply know the number now, and know you'll have to see it, every time you open that wallet, until the day you decide to do something different. This story isn't really about the number you just calculated. It's about how many times you've used the phrase "next month" as a way to delay facing yourself, and about how the only thing that ever stood between you and a different life wasn't income, wasn't luck, just one very small decision, repeated steadily, week after week. The coworker by the coffee machine isn't wealthier because she's smarter. The old classmate on social media didn't hit her goal because of some sudden windfall. Both of them simply stopped saying "next month" earlier than you did. At some point, neither of them can quite pinpoint anymore. So if tonight you sat down and actually calculated that number for yourself, do you think you'd want to know it, or do you think there are some numbers better left uncalculated, forever?